So good to have Gary and Pastor Greg back. I tell you, it was very quiet at the office without them. It was almost like a vacation, but it's good. It was good to have them back, and I know, man, just from having a chance to touch base with them a little bit, just a little bit of their trip, they have so much that's on their heart, and I can't wait for them to launch this new series next week, Passion, and just for them to share with the church the things God's been showing them, especially revealing to them with their stay that they had in Japan just a few days ago. Well, today we're going to be wrapping up our series, Let It Go. We launched this series back on Easter Sunday, and kind of riffing off the Frozen song "Let It Go," this popular song that many of you guys may have heard. And we've been covering just a bunch of different topics of things that maybe things we hold on to, things that have become such an important part of our lives, but we need to release to God, but we're just holding on to it for dear life. And we've covered topics like control, letting go control of our lives to God. We've been talking about topics like regret, things that have gone on in our lives that we still struggle with, and letting those regrets go and letting God deal with them. And last week, Pastor James was sharing about letting go of expectation. Sometimes these unfair expectations that we put on our lives and that we place on other people, and letting go of those expectations and trusting in the plan that God has for each and every one of us. Well, this morning we're going to focus on one more thing that maybe we need to let go of, and that is fear. Fear. And I think fear is something we all deal with in some shape or form. But before we launch into the message, I just want to say a quick prayer and just pray over what God is going to share with us this morning. Lord, we again are thankful to be here, Father. And as we've been going through this series, Let It Go, I think, at least within my heart, Father, I know it's something you've just been dealing with me in so many different areas, Lord. These things that I hold on to, Father, these things that I try to solve on my own, or I try to find solutions in other people. And I don't just let go into your hands, Father. I don't release it into the hands that can handle it and can deal with it in the way it should be, Father. And as we focus this morning on fear, Lord, I know fear is something that grabs all of us. It affects all of us, our behavior and how we handle situations and our choices, Lord. I ask, Father, that this morning you would speak so powerfully, that you'd cut to the heart of each person here, Father, and meet them directly where they're at. Speak to them powerfully, Father. And that you would just use my words, Father. I know anything that I share up here, if it's from myself, it doesn't hold any weight. It doesn't make any difference. So I pray, Father, that you just powerfully speak through me, that your Holy Spirit would move in this room today. We love you, Lord, and we praise you, and we pray all this in your precious name. Amen. Well, again, we think of the word fear, and maybe for some of you guys, certain things pop into your mind. Certain thoughts are conjured up. Maybe things that you guys are fearful of. And many of those things maybe are fears that we all share. I can think of things like, losing a loved one. I think it's something that we all fear in some shape or form. Or maybe even relating it to us is, losing our lives. That brings a certain fear to us of how that might happen and when our time is up. For some of us, it might be loneliness. We have the fear of just being lonely the rest of our lives, not having people there to share life with. For some of us, fear might be even something a little more practical, things that we face maybe on a day-to-day basis or a month-to-month basis. For some of us, going to the dentist is a fear. I know there's some people, man, they cannot stand going to the dentist. Or flying. Some people are scared of flying. They don't want to get up in a plane, and they try to avoid that as much as they can. For some people, it's going on roller coasters, right? We'll go to amusement parks, and there's certain people I know that they'll steer clear of anything that looks like it's dangerous. They'll just steer clear of that. And for some of us, it's maybe claustrophobia, right? Being in enclosed areas. That brings a little bit of a shiver to our spine. We don't like that feeling. It brings fear into our hearts. And maybe for many of you, it's maybe one of the most popular fears out there, and that is the fear of doing what I'm doing now, and that's public speaking, right? There's so many people who don't like to get up, that uncomfortable feeling of getting up and having all eyes and all ears on them and knowing that people are listening to every word they say. Well, for me, I wanted to share one of my fears this morning, and one of my fears, it's pretty common, is actually heights. I'm scared of heights. And it's not so much heights, like if you put me in an elevator and you took me to the top of the Empire State Building, I'd be fine. I'm fine with that. You take me up high areas, I don't get scared of that. But it's the process of climbing to something that's high. And that freaks me out, getting on a ladder or having to rock climb. Those types of things are things I do not feel comfortable with. And just this fear kind of kicks in. And I think it's because I don't have very good balance. Even I think people see me get up on a ladder 2 or 3 rungs up, and I'm already feeling a little out of my comfort zone, and I try to play it off. But, this fear actually came into play a few years ago. I help out with Evolution. It's our junior high ministry here at South Bay Community Church. And I jumped onto the team to serve with Pastor James and some of the other advisors, and we went on a retreat. And so this was the first retreat I'd ever been on. We take the kids away for a few days. We went to a place called the Oaks, which is up by Lake Hughes. And, at each of these campsites, they have just different courses or different activities that maybe the kids can't do down here. And so they always look forward to it. So we always book some time to take advantage of these different things that the campsites have to offer. Well, the one day we went out there on Saturday, and James had signed the kids up to do the rope course, And so, this rope course, it wasn't just down on the ground. We actually had to climb up this mountain to get to the rope course. So this in and of itself, we're hiking up a few minutes, and we get to the top of this hill, and this is where the rope course sits right on top of. And from this top of the hill, you can kind of see the whole campsite. You're up pretty high. And even then, I'm like, whoa, this is pretty crazy. So I see this rope course, and it goes maybe 75 feet up in the air. And James is kind of giving this little message to the kids. Some of the kids are scared, rightfully so. He's like, hey, you know what? You got to trust in God. You got to conquer your fear. And these kids, they don't just go up solo, they go up in pairs. They put them up in pairs because you can't climb this course unless there's two of you to do it. So I'm looking at this thing. I think we have a picture of it, what it looks like. And right there, it doesn't look too scary, right? That's a couple of our students back in the day climbing that thing. But the one that they were climbing was, it was this course where there was 2x4s. It was these big planks, and maybe they were about 3-4 feet wide. And so you climb up on that thing, and they're just kind of held up on the side by ropes and cables. And right there, it's not too bad because that's the first step up on there. But as it goes, the 2x4s get spread out further and further. So right there, you can grab it and you can grab onto the next one and then climb up, right? But as you go, they get further and further apart where you can't touch it anymore. And the only way to get up higher is to work as a team. You have to boost the next person up, and the person gets up and then they pull the next person up. Well, the kids, I'm looking at that thing and I'm thinking, there's no way I'm getting on that thing. It's just not going to happen. And that's because not only is it like that, we're on top of the mountain, but it's windy. So the wind is blowing the thing back and forth, so you're even more unstable. Well, James has the kids partner up, like I mentioned, and at the end of it, there's one boy who doesn't have a partner. And I see him looking around, for someone to partner up with, and he locks eyes with me, and he starts walking over towards me, and I'm thinking, oh, God, come on, are you serious? This little guy walks up over to me, and he's like, Davey, he's like, I don't have a partner, and would you go with me? Because otherwise I can't go. And he's this little chubby guy, and he's got glasses on. And I look at his face, and I can't tell him no. Right after James gives this big rally cry, man, conquer your fear, trust in God, you can do it. So I tell him, oh, yeah, of course, Nikki, I'll go with you. And inside I'm like, oh, my gosh, how am I going to get out of this, And right then and there, that fear kicked in. I could feel it kind of churning in my stomach. I'm like, man, I do not want to go on this thing. I don't want to do it. But I'm watching these kids, and these girls are like under 5 feet tall, like 80 pounds, and they're climbing like Spider-Man, dude. They're like booking up this thing. And how much of a wiener would I look like if I didn't go up there and do it, right? So I said yes, and honestly, I was trying to think of ways that I could get out of this. I'm thinking, man, how can I like duck out of this thing? I'm thinking, well, maybe if I get an important phone call, I can like duck out to the side, or maybe if I like pretend like my ankle's sore, like, oh man, my ankle, I'm sorry, Nikki, I can't go. But all these excuses I know will be very transparent. And so there was a part right at the end where before we were going up, I'm watching everybody. I just pulled off to the side, and I went down on one knee, and I was like pretending like I was tying my shoe, and I was really just praying to God. I felt nauseous, actually. I felt nauseous about to go up there, and I was just trying to, suck it up and get up on this thing. Well, eventually it was our time to go, and we jumped up on top of this thing, and we started climbing up. And again, the first two rungs weren't too bad, and I think at the end of the story, I'd like to tell you, man, I conquered my fear, and it was amazing, but I hated every second I was on that thing. And as we were climbing, it got a little harder, right? So, of course, I climb up to the higher ones, and I'm not expecting this junior high kid to pull me up to the higher levels of it. So I go up, and I'm there, and I have to pull Nicky up. And Nicky, he's roughly my size. He's not a small child. He's a little chubby, right? So I'm holding onto the rope, I'm holding onto the edge, I'm balancing on this thing, the wind's whipping it back and forth, so my balance is kind of going back and forth. And I have to reach down, I have to pull this kid up with one arm. So I grab him, and with all my might, I'm yanking this kid, and I'm like, dear God, how much does this kid weigh? And I'm like yanking him up with everything I have. He finally gets up on top, and we have to keep repeating this process. But fortunately, you're only on there for a couple minutes. They give you a few minutes, and then you have to get off. I just want to let you know, these kids are harnessed in, so it's not like they're going to plummet to their doom if they fall off. So we had a harness on, but that didn't really help me at all. That didn't give me any sense of security. So, luckily we made it up a few rungs. We made a good effort at it. We didn't get to the top. And I think one of the greatest feelings was as they were lowering me down on that harness and my feet touched the ground. And I told myself, I am never going on that thing ever again. And we still go to that campsite. I think we're going to head there this summer, but you will not catch me on top of that mountain. I'm staying. I don't care what kid comes up. I'm not going on that thing ever again. But this is just a fear I think I struggle with. It's a fear that I've had for a while, and, I was able to get past it a little bit there. But, as I tell you that story and as I was thinking through it, I believe, I had some good motives in the decision that I made. Of course, I'm going to go with this kid, and I'm not going to let him not be able to experience something like this. But I think there was other factors at play in why I decided to go up onto this rope course. And if I'm honest with myself, it was because, I didn't want to be made fun of. I felt like, man, if I don't go, how am I going to look? I'm going to look pretty lame to these kids and to the advisors that I don't have the guts to get up and do this. And so that motivated my decision in many ways. I began to think, man, how uncool would I look, to all these kids who like me and like to hang out with me if I didn't go? And so a lot of my decisions, even though part of it was to be there for Nikki and to experience this with them, a lot of it was because I was scared of what man would think about me if I didn't do this. That really motivated a lot of what I decided to do. And if I had to break it down even further, I would say I had a fear of man. I had a fear of how they would view me and what they would say about me if I didn't do this. And I think fear of man maybe is something that motivates. It's a fear that a lot of us have and motivates a lot of our decisions. Some of us know that, and some of us aren't really aware of that. But I think fear of man is something that drives many of us in a way that we're not even aware of. And if I had to describe fear of man, I think maybe some of us think, well, fear of man, is that like just physically being scared of someone? Maybe that's a little bit of part of it, but it's not physically being scared of someone. There's a little bit more to it than that. And fear of man is when we let other people's actions and thoughts control our behavior. It is when we need people and what they can provide to such an extent that it becomes a godlike figure in our lives. And I've been studying this book I'm taking a discipleship counseling class for one of my Bible classes, and we've been studying this book, and it's called When People Are Big and God is Small, and it's really been dealing a lot with this idea, and I never realized, how much this comes into play into my life and maybe the lives of other people. This book is written by Ed Welch, and it's an eye-opening book about this thought, and the author, Ed Welch, does a great job of describing what fear man is, and I really wanted to read his description to you. If you guys have your program, there's this yellow sheet in there. I encourage you guys to take it out. A lot of our verses are going to be on there, and you can also take a look at the screen. But let me read this quote about what Ed Welch says about fear of man. It says, fear of man includes being afraid of someone, but it extends to holding someone in awe, being controlled or mastered by people, worshiping other people, putting your trust in people, or needing people versus loving them. The fear of man could be summarized this way. We replace God with people. Instead of a biblically guided fear of the Lord, we fear others. When we are in our teens, it is called peer pressure. When we are older, it is called people-pleasing. And recently, it has been called codependency. And I thought, man, what a great description, of what this fear looks like. It's, man, other people's opinions and words, they hold so much weight that they drive your decisions, right? Because you don't know how they're going to react, and you want to stay on their good side, and so maybe you make choices that you normally wouldn't make. It's looking at other people and having them fill needs, not God filling needs, but them filling the needs. Like, I need to be loved. I need them to care for me. And those people control how you feel about yourself because they have something that you want, and so you put them in this place of authority in your life. That's fear of man. It's needing someone's approval to such a degree that you're doing whatever it takes to get it. You just want that person's approval. You want their love. And it could look like fearing a person's reaction and opinion of you to where actually it affects your ability to obey God because their immediate reaction holds more weight than obeying God. It becomes this contest that goes back and forth. Do we fear man or do we fear God? And which one's going to come out on top? The Bible, it even warns us of what the fear of man looks like. It warns us against this. And it speaks on it a few different times. And one verse I wanted to pull to your guys' attention was Proverbs 29:25. And Proverbs, it's the book of wisdom. And there are a few scriptures on there dealing with the fear of man. And Proverbs 29:25 says this, fear of man will prove to be a snare, but whoever trusts in the Lord is kept safe. Now, if you guys don't know what a snare is it's a trap. It's a trap that's used to capture animals. It's a trap that's used to capture birds. And what they're saying there in Proverbs is that this fear of man, it'll capture you. It'll snag you. It'll capture you in its grip. And once you do, it's going to prevent you from being close to God, this fear of man. And so, I want us to just ask ourselves today, do we fear man? If we had to be honest with ourselves, if we really looked at our lives and took an inventory, do we fear him? And, I came across some questions, I think, that might help guide us in this area to discern if this is something we struggle with. And I'm betting there's going to be something somewhere in these questions that you're going to be like, man, you know what? I do struggle with that. That's me. I struggle with that. So let's go through these questions together, and we'll kind of see where we stand with them. The first one is, have you ever struggled with peer pressure? Have you ever struggled with peer pressure? And this is something I think that we associate with kids, right? We associate with junior hires, teenagers, maybe even college students. Peer pressure is a popular word that's thrown around in those circles. And peer pressure is when we give in to the fear of man because we do things maybe we normally wouldn't do because we're pressured into doing them. For kids, we look at it and we see it's pretty common that maybe they might drink or they might smoke or they might do drugs or swear or have sex, all because they want to fit in and because everyone else is doing it. So they give in to this sense of peer pressure. They have to do this activity to fit in with other people. And I think adults do the same thing, but we call it something different. We might call it, people-pleasing or codependency. And that goes into our next question. It says, are you overcommitted? Are you a people-pleaser? And I believe some of us have so many things going on in our lives that we don't know how to say no. We can't say no. And we just keep adding commitments to our plate, and our plate gets bigger and bigger. And maybe we're doing this because the expectation that people have, we feel like if we say no, that person's going to look at us differently. They're not going to like us in the same way. We don't want to rock the boat, so we just keep adding it on. Yeah, I'll do that. Yeah, no problem. Yeah, I'll add that on because we want to be the good guy. And it leads to a very unhealthy life because eventually we're spread so thin that we can't give a good effort to what we're doing, because we're just trying to manage, we're trying to juggle and keep all these things in the air. And if I'm honest with you guys, man, this is something I really struggle with, fear of man, and it comes out in people-pleasing. I think as I've gotten older, I've realized that in my life that, man, I'm a people-pleaser because I just keep taking things on in my life. And a big part of it is that I have a fear of letting people down, of not meeting expectation. And I feel like, if I tell them no, that they're going to look down on me because, their expectation of me will fall through. And this is why, many times I look at my schedule and I'm so busy. I have so many church activities and just, social things to do when I should just say, no, I can't do that right now. But, I don't want to rock the boat. I'm a guy that, likes peace. I like it when everybody's getting along. And I don't want to be the one that rocks the boat. And I'm scared that if I say no, it might rock the boat. And it may mean that I alienate some people. And it may mean that I let some people down, and that doesn't sit well with me. So I just keep saying, yes, 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 bring more on. And that's something, I struggle with, and I'm not sure if you do, but it's been something a process I've been trying to deal with in God, and I'll share a little more about that a little later in the message. Let's move on. Let's burn through a few more of these. Is self-esteem a critical concern for you? And I was reading, as I was doing some research on this, they were saying that Americans are notorious for having low self-esteem. And I was thinking, how is that? How does that work? I don't know if we're any more self-conscious than anybody else in the world, but what they said is because Americans' lives revolve around what other people think of them. And we can see this in a lot of different ways. I think it's because we have so much stuff that we're very aware of who has things and who doesn't. Our clothes, the car that we drive, a lot of status symbols, right? And so our self-esteem is wrapped up in these things if we have them, right? It's thrown in our faces in the media. We see it all the time. If you have this, you're going to have a happy life. This is going to complete you. And, if you doubt that even further, just take a look at TV, all these reality TV shows, where people come and they put their lives on display for everyone to see. It's because maybe they're looking for approval. They're looking for someone to boost them, to love them. Even they're willing to put their love lives on display in shows like The Bachelor and The Bachelorette, right? They need this love, and they want people to see them, in a way that they would become famous, and people would know who they are, and they would have notoriety. And it even plays into shows where you put your talents on display, like American Idol and The Voice, right? These singers go up there, and they're looking for a chance to make it in the music industry. which is a good thing, right? There's a special opportunity that's there. But in a way, they're looking for people to glorify them. They're looking for people to tell them how great they are. There's judges there judging them. This was good. This was not. You're amazing. You're the next star. And they find their worth, all their worth and their self-esteem is wrapped up in the applause of other people. And if they don't get it, they don't feel good about themselves. That may be a way that plays out. The next one is, are you always second-guessing decisions because of what other people might say? So you know what you want to do, but you're like, maybe I won't do that because so-and-so is not going to like it. Or maybe I won't do this because, that might rub them the wrong way. And, even if it's the right thing to do, I'm not going to make that choice because, I don't want to ruffle any feathers. For some of us, do we feel empty or meaningless? And this, I think for many of us, it's because we're dependent on others to fill us. And so in a way, they control us, right, to fill the empty voids in our lives. Do people often make you angry or depressed? Do you look at people and be like, man, they just make me so angry, or man, that person's not treating me well, I just feel down about it. And one thing I learned, my sister is a counselor, and I think I was sharing this with her one time, is, I was talking about someone in particular, and I was just thinking, man, this person just makes me so mad, with the choices that they make. I'm so angry right now. And I think what my sister was explaining to me is what she was saying, that person's not making you feel anyway. They're doing an action, and you're choosing to respond to it in a certain way. You're choosing to be angry about it, or you're choosing to be mad about it. What they're doing, you have a choice in how you react to it. So you can't blame them. It's you choosing to do it. And I think, when we're angry and depressed, we're choosing to let that other person make us feel that way. In a way, we're saying, hey, that they're leading to it, but we always have the choice, on how we deal with it. And so we're choosing to feel mad or sad or happy or glad or whatever it is, but we have the choice, but we're giving people the power to determine our emotions. Another one is, do you avoid people? Do you avoid people? And this one's even more of an extreme, because you would say even a hermit, a person who lives in seclusion, they have a fear of man because they fear man so much, or they don't want to interact with man, that they just pull themselves entirely out of the equation. Right? They don't want to be around people, so they exclude themselves because they don't want to deal with it. And that might be a fear of man in and of itself. And I think one that plays out for many of us, and I think you guys will identify with this, is sometimes we avoid people, right? We avoid people because there's people we come in contact with, maybe even when we head out into the church lobby, or maybe when we're even at the mall, people that are, I would describe them as emotionally expensive people, right? Or extra grace required people. People that we know if we see them, we're going to get into this drawn-out conversation, and it's going to be emotional, and maybe we're just not ready for it in that moment. So when we might be walking in the lobby, and we see that person, and they're coming towards us, and we just detour, right? And we go and we talk to someone else. We pretend that we're busy, right? Because we just, we don't want to get invested in there, right? So that person helps to dictate our actions and what we do. You're walking at the mall, you see someone, you don't feel like speaking to them, so you just head right into the store, And I did that one time, and I didn't realize I was going into Victoria's Secret, so I had to make a U-turn and head right back out of there, because that's not where I wanted to be seen. But, avoiding people is another fear of man. The last few here is, are shyness or embarrassment common for you? And again, that just dials back to people's opinions and reactions. You're embarrassed because you're afraid how people are going to react. You're shy because, interaction with people is not comfortable for you. And I think, one of these last few ones that's a big one is, when you compare yourself with other people, do you feel inferior to others, or do you feel good? And this is the comparison game, right? This is, I don't feel good about myself because when I look at myself compared to someone else, I feel that they're better, right? They're smarter than me. They're more athletic than me. They're better looking than me. They have more gifts than I do. And this works on the flip side, is that a lot of times we boost our self-esteem by comparing ourselves with other people. We look at someone else like, man, my life is way better off than that person. So I feel good about what I'm doing. Or look at my car I'm driving. I've been pretty successful, and compared to them, I think I'm doing pretty well, right? Or man, look at my life. I have a good job. I have a good family. I have a great wife or a great husband. Compared to other people, life's looking pretty good for me. And there's nothing wrong with appreciating what you have, but if you are using other people to push them down to boost yourself up, then that's a fear of man, because if you took those people away, would you still feel good about yourself? Or would you not be so sure anymore because there's no one else to compare yourself to? There's no one that you can step over and feel good about yourself because you're in better shape than they are. So is that a fear of man? The comparison, I think in athletics that happens a lot, right? There's winners and there's losers. And the winners feel good and the losers don't. And if you lose, you could push that person down, right? A lot of athletes, it kind of works that way. It's all about the win and you feel good, but if you lose, you don't. Well, the last one I wanted to bring to your guys' attention, and have you guys ever been too timid to share your faith because you were scared of how other people might respond? And boom, I think this is one that I've dealt with on so many occasions. I think the number one reason why we don't share our faith, actually two, but number one reason why we don't share our faith is because we're scared of the reaction, right? We don't know how people are going to receive our faith. If they're going to look down on us, or if they're going to make fun of us for what we believe, or if they're going to come in opposition to what we believe in, right? Or we feel like, I don't have the right words to share my faith. I'm going to look stupid. And if they ask me questions, I'm not going to be able to answer them. So I'm just going to tuck my hands in my pocket. I'm not going to take this opportunity. And maybe God will use somebody else to share my faith, share what I believe in, share the gospel with other people. We're so worried about how people are going to react to it, instead of just, trusting God and saying, you know what? My opportunity, my job is to share the faith, is to throw that seed out there. And you know what God's going to do with it, what he's going to do. If he's going to grow it right then and there, he will. But I just need to be obedient. But we, our minds don't think that way. We're almost one step ahead of God where we don't trust that he can take it. And even if the person does oppose it, maybe again, it's just a link in the chain for them to come to know God. But it's a fear. It's a fear of man and how that looks. If you're honest with yourselves today, maybe you guys can identify with some of these areas that you're struggling with. Because I think in some way we all have competition going on in our lives for who the number one priority is going to be. Who is number one in our lives? And I want you guys to imagine something. Imagine that there is a throne that sits above all of our lives. There is a throne there. And at some time or another, someone or something is going to sit in that throne. And what that throne does is that whatever sits in that throne, it results in what's most important to you. It results in who you're obedient to. It results in how you make your choices, what fills your life, what you think about, and what brings you happiness. Basically, whatever sits in this throne dictates your life. And for many of us, ideally, God is supposed to be sitting in this throne up above our lives. But in so many cases, that is not how it works out. We put other things or other people on that throne, and those things begin to dictate our choices, our happiness, how we feel about ourselves. And the thing we realize is that, that throne, it's never empty. There's always something inside, sitting in that throne. It's never empty. And it's just a matter of what are we placing there? What are we putting over our lives? What is dictating our lives? And that's your first point, guys, in your program, is that at all times, somebody or something is Lord in your life. At all times, something is ruling your life. And if you read about God, you read about Jesus, the one thing you know is that that's not something that he's going to stand for, this competition. Jesus, he wants to be number one. He wants to be in that throne 24/7, every day, at all times. And he doesn't even want there to be a second place. So, if you're running, say you're running a track meet, right? There should be no second, third, or fourth place. It's God first, and everything else is a distant second. He wants to sit on the throne of our lives, and he makes it clear that he wants to be the one and only. But when this fear of man kicks in, it comes in direct opposition to God sitting on that throne, and it's tough to overcome because sometimes this fear of man has developed over years. Even dating back to our childhood, these things that are inside of us that raise up fear, these dependencies that we have on other people. But I want to share with you guys today, how do we overcome this fear of man? What does that process look like? Once we identify it in our lives, how do we get past that? And so, let's dive a little deeper into this. And I think it's kind of ironic that the way we replace one fear, the fear of man, is to replace it with another fear. And I think you replace fear of man with fear of the Lord. That's what God tells us in his scriptures, is that we overcome the fear of man with the fear of the Lord. Now today, I think our church, fear of the Lord is something that maybe we kind of tap dance around. It's not something, a characteristic of God or a reaction to God that we highlight a lot, or it's been watered down a lot over the years. It's kind of rare that you hear about this fear of the Lord. And when we do hear about fear of the Lord, it's more of like, hey, honor God, revere him. But I think God, if you read the scriptures, he does want us to fear him, and fear him in a physical way, in a way that makes us shake in our shoes. That's the kind of fear that he's talking about. And, I think for a lot of us, we would rather look at God and we would say he's merciful and he's gracious and he's caring and he's faithful. All are true. All these things are 100% true. But God wants us to focus in on that missing part of fearing him, because it is such an important tool to really understanding God and being able to live our lives for him. He instructs us to fear him. And if we look at the Bible, you'll read scriptures where people who come into contact with God, they don't just come up and they're thankful to be there and they're exchanging pleasantries with God. When they experience God, it is an amazing thing of what their reaction is. And we'll take a look at a couple of those reactions right now. If you guys look in Revelation 1:17, this is John. John is coming before God, and this is his reaction. It says, "When I saw him, I fell at his feet as though dead." I fell at his feet as though dead. When John came into the presence of God, it wasn't, to give God a high five. It wasn't, God, I love you. It was the only reaction he had to be in his presence that it drove him down to his feet, to lay down on his face, to get down. He couldn't even look at God. He was just face down, laying there like he was dead. That was his only reaction. Because he feared God. In that moment, in his presence, he feared him above all else. Again, we look at the reaction of Moses in Exodus. In Moses, when he encounters the burning bush, God is speaking to him. And in those verses, God says, "Then he said, I am the God of your father, the God of Abraham, the God of Isaac, and the God of Jacob." At this, Moses hid his face because he was afraid to look at God. He had to look away because it was too much for him. It was too much for him. The same goes for Isaiah, Saul. You guys read account after account of these biblical characters. When they see God, they go face down before him. And if these famous biblical characters, these men of faith, responded in this way, why would we be any different when we come into the presence of God? Is that there needs to be a part of us that fears God because of who he is and what he does. And the reason why, Moses, the reason why John, the reason why they feared God in this way is because they were so sinful as man that when they come into the presence of a flawless, holy God, it is just too much for us to take in. Because I believe in that moment we realize that, we don't deserve anything from God. When we look at ourselves in comparison to God, he gives us grace and mercy, but the only thing we're deserving of in that moment is punishment. Because we are so impure, we are so fallible, we are so full of sin, and it's only by the grace of God that we can be in his presence, that we can talk to him in that way. And I think these guys, when they got in the presence of God, that realization, that idea became crystal clear. And all they could do was just to go down on their face in embarrassment, in admiration, in love, in respect and awe of God. And maybe that's something that we need to think about when we come into God's presence. Proverbs 9:10 speaks on this, how important the fear of the Lord is. Proverbs 9:10 says this, "The fear of the Lord is the beginning of wisdom, and the knowledge of the Holy One is understanding." I think to properly fear God, it's just the first step into we can never be truly wise until we fear God, Now, our God, he is so merciful, right? And fearing him is just the beginning. And once we fear him, we're able to understand how much he loves us. So that fear, it's just a portion, even though as important as it is to have, it's just a portion of who God is and how we are to relate to him and interact with him. We move beyond fear, and it leads to so many different things in our lives, so many different sides to the relationship. And it's kind of a hard idea to explain, but I believe I can do it. Maybe talking about a parent and how we fear some of our parents. And I know it's Mother's Day, and I should be talking about my mom, and I love my mom. I'm thankful that she's here this morning. But talking about physical fear, my mom's only 4'10", so I never physically feared her. I love my mom to death, but as far as physically, she's not imposing. But she didn't have to be because she had the muscle behind her, which was my dad. And that's what I feared. And to this day, I fear and I respect my dad. My dad is 70 years of age, and when he raises his voice, I still listen. I'm in my 30s now, but I know when he gets serious, it's serious, right? And I better take it seriously, even now, even as an adult. And, he's easygoing, but when it comes time to raise his voice and when it came time to discipline myself and my two sisters, it was real. It got real in the house very quickly, and you could feel it, and the attitude would change. And I remember one time, maybe I was in maybe first or second grade, where I kind of came against my dad and what that looked like. And I don't know, for some particular reason on that day, I was maybe feeling very brave, or I was feeling very stupid, depending on how you look at it. And I remember, it's still very clear in my mind, we were in the house, my dad was by the doorway, and he told me to do something. He wanted something done, and he told me he wanted it done, by the time he comes back in the house. And me, I don't know why, but I was feeling very brave, and I was thinking, I don't have to do this. I don't have to do this. I can do what I want. And so, I walk up to the door. My dad leaves. I think he's heading out to the garage. And as the door closes, he's maybe 3 or 4 steps outside, part under my breath, but loud enough where I know he'll hear me. I'm like, shut up. I told him to shut up. And he heard me, and as soon as you say something, you just want to take the words back, right? You wish you could pull them back in. I saw he was walking out, and he stopped, and then he just turned around, and I saw him, I'm like, oh man, and at that moment, my heart just sunk, right? I start backpedaling inside the house, and my dad came in. I saw him come in through the screen door, and he was not happy. He's like, what did you say? And at that moment, you just start backpedaling as fast as you can. I didn't mean it. I didn't say anything. I didn't mean it. I'm sorry. I didn't say anything. And at that moment, I just had that fear of him because I knew what was about to happen. And in these days, there were no timeouts. There was no timeouts. I wasn't going to a corner. I was going to a corner and getting hit with a belt. That's what was going to happen to me. And I remember my dad just punishing me, right? Because, he didn't want to spare the rod, and it was justified. But there was a fear there, and I had coming the punishment that was doled out, and he wore me out with that belt on my behind. But on the flip side, as much as I fear my dad in that way, I also love him too. There's a different side to the relationship, and it's because I know his character. I know how hard he's worked to provide for my family all these years. I know how much he loves each of us. I know his character. I know what he's all about. I respect and I admire him, and that's because I'm with him every day. Every day of my life, my dad's been there. And so I know him. So that fear, it's still there. It hasn't gone anywhere. That reverence, that fear, that respect for my dad. But there's also other parts of the relationship as well. And because I fear him, I know he wants what's best for me. I know when he disciplines me, it's for my own good. I know when he tells me things that I need to obey him because I know his character. I know what he's all about. Again, the fear is still there, but there's so much more to the relationship outside of that. And I believe it's like that with God. God, on one hand, he does. He wants us to have a real fear of him. But that real fear is going to lead to other things that we need. And that real fear is going to lead to trusting God's character, knowing that he loves us, being able to genuinely obey the things that he tells us because we know his character, and his character is to care for us, is to love us beyond all else. I don't believe we can fear God in the correct way until we know him, until we really know him. Just like, I couldn't fear my dad in the proper way if I didn't live every day of my life with him and know him in a 360-degree angle. Know him inside and out. And this is something that, as they appointed kings in the Old Testament, that they knew that for this king to be able to serve in the correct way, they needed to know God. If they were going to fear him, they needed to know God. And if we look at Deuteronomy, there's a great set of scriptures in here where it talks about the steps that they would go through to know God in that way. And it says in verse 18, when he takes the throne, this is the king, when the king takes the throne of his kingdom, he is to write for himself on a scroll a copy of this law, taken from that of the Levitical priest. It is to be with him, and he is to read it all the days of his life, so that he may learn to revere the Lord his God and follow carefully all the words of this law and these decrees. You see, these kings, they would read this day in, day out, day in, day out. They would read about God, who he was, his character, how he viewed us, his laws for us. And day after day, as they did that, they were able to revere the Lord. They were able to honor him. They were able to look at him in awe and fear him in the proper way because they knew who God was. They knew him inside and out. You know, this guy would read the word of the God all the days of his life so that he would learn to fear God in the proper way. Not just fear, but also understand God and love God and trust God and obey God. You know, the only way to fear God correctly, I believe, is to read his word, to know his hearts, to know his commands, to know how much he loves each of us. You know, there's a process there. And this fear and understanding, it leads to something even greater. And if we read the word, you know, I think we can maybe come to this conclusion is that the fear of the Lord, when we have that in the right and correct way, it's going to lead to reverent submission. That we will give our lives over to God. It'll lead to reverent submission, and that's going to lead to genuine obedience. It just makes sense, right? That if you know God, and you know what he's about, and you know how much he cares, that you can submit your life to him because you trust him. And if you submit your life to him, you can genuinely obey him. You can genuinely obey the things that he tells you. See, this fear of God, it leads to so many different things, but it's the first step that leads to this. Just like these kings, their fear and understanding of God, it led them to submit and obey to God and to follow God's commands and decrees. So once we reverently submit to God, we can obey what he asks of us. And I think this is where the fear of man begins to lose power in our lives, because we can listen to the commands that God tells us about how foolish it is to fear man. And this is when we stop depending on man to complete us or define us. It's when we stop depending on man to feel a need that they were never intended to. It's when we're able to let go of these fears and trust in God instead. And your next point is this, guys. I think one thing God tells us in the scriptures is that we are to move to need other people less and to love them more. To need other people less and to love them more. You know, I believe the intention of God all along was not that we need people, you know, that we need them to meet a need, or we need them to feel good about ourselves, or we need them to tell us, you know, what we're all about, or us in reversal, you know, be able to dictate to someone and manipulate other people. That's not what God intended at all. He intended it for us to love other people in a God-fearing way, to love them in the way that he tells us to in the Bible, to love people for the glory of God. So instead of looking for ways to manipulate people, we will ask God, what is our duty to them? What is our duty to man? And I think this kind of brings us to something that really breaks the hold of fearing man, is that the difference between going from a people pleaser to a people lover. To someone that just is out there to please people and make them feel good about themselves, to someone who genuinely loves someone, to being a people lover. And someone who you can see who lived his life this way was Paul. And as you guys read about his life in the New Testament, you know, Paul was a people lover because he didn't change his message according to what other people thought of him. Now, Paul, he didn't always start off this way, right? He started off as Saul, and we maybe know a little bit about his progression as he was someone who persecuted people on behalf of others, right? On behalf of the Jews. In a way, he was pleasing other people because he was persecuting the Gentiles. He would persecute them, even times have actions that led them to being put to death. And so he lived his life for fear of man, but once God confronted him on this road, his life changed, and he started this process of being a people lover. And he was lovingly able to confront people as opposed to being controlled by them. You know, Paul, he didn't pull any punches. You know, when he had a chance to share the gospel, he would share it loud and proud, and he would share it in people's face because he wouldn't compromise the word of God. He shared it in the context that it was to be shared. He didn't water it down because he was scared of man's reaction. Because he knew if he had to make a choice to either fear man or fear God, there was no contest to him which one he was going to choose. And he even lays it out in Galatians 1:10. He says this, "Am I now trying to win the approval of human beings or of God? Or am I trying to please people? If I were still trying to please people, I would not be a servant of Christ." He was saying, hey, you know, I can live my life one way or the other. I can live for man's approval or I can live for God's approval. But I can't do both. One of those things needs to sit on the throne of my life. I can't. Because if I do one, I can't be a servant of Christ if I live for the approval of man. And I think, to break the fear of man is we need to figure out which one are we going to serve. Are we going to love people in a real and genuine way, or are we going to live our lives to please them and to have them fulfill us? There's a choice that needs to be made. Paul knew, he knew the truth, and the truth was that once we fear God, we have nothing else to fear. Once we fear the God of this universe, everything else pales in comparison. It falls flat. People, what can they do? They can make fun of us. Yeah, they can. They can ridicule us. They can tease us. They can make fun of us. They can come in opposition of us. People, yeah, they can physically hurt us too. They can. They can take action, physical action against us. But the one thing they have no control over is our soul. There's only one person who dictates that, and it's not man. Matthew 10:28 says it, and fear not them that kill the body, but are not able to kill the soul, but rather fear him that is able to destroy both soul and body in hell. This is what Paul figured out, and I'm hoping this is something that we can figure out, is that, man, for all they can do, it's not much compared to what God can do. God controls our salvation. God controls our soul, the things that are everlasting, the things that move beyond this earth. So when we put a comparison and we stack man up against God, we realize, man, there is no comparison. There is no contest here. The thing I love about God is, he'll say fear him, but in the same breath he'll turn around and say, fear not. Fear not man. You don't have to fear man for what they can do to you. If you look at the King James Version of the Bible, there's over 80 references that say, fear not. God on one hand will say, fear me, because I'm the one that's to be feared. But on the other hand, he'll say, fear not man. Don't fear this. Don't fear this. You don't have to fear it, because I'm in control. I'm the one that you can rest in. I'm the one you can depend on. And so, dialing it back to those questions I asked you earlier, if we were saying yes to a lot of those questions, when we no longer fear man, a lot of those questions we don't have to answer yes to anymore. When you fear God in the proper way, you no longer need to feel empty or meaningless, because God values you above all. He values you. You no longer need to struggle with peer pressure because you're worried about what man thinks, because that takes a back seat to what God thinks of you. You no longer need to worry about people's reaction when you share your faith. I know it still might be there, but at the end of the day, when you share your faith with someone, their reaction, it's just you being obedient, and God will dictate that reaction. He'll handle it from there. We no longer need to be a slave to that, so that it keeps us quiet and it keeps us, at a place where we can't fulfill the Great Commission, which is to go and make disciples of men and share our faith. We don't have to do that anymore. We don't have to worry about the reaction. When you fear God, you no longer have to find your worth in comparing yourself to other people. That is God that defines your worth. It's God that tells you who you are. And God has made you in such a specific, amazing, and special way that no matter what man thinks of you, it doesn't alter what God thinks of you. You're no longer a slave to that, to comparison, to playing that comparison game. And finally, you no longer have to commit yourself and always say yes to things and be a people pleaser, because you're scared that's the only way people are going to like you, or you have this expectation that you place on your life, and the only way you can meet it is to keep saying yes and keep fulfilling all these commitments. You don't have to live your way that way anymore, because you realize that sometimes the loving thing to do and being a people lover is to say no to others. Maybe that might be the best thing you can do for them. Or even in the process of saying no, it allows them to take care of things themselves, and God can work through that way. Or it allows someone else to come in that God wants to use to fill that need. It's from going a people pleaser to a people lover. I want to close with this, guys. Once we fear God, I think everything else will fall into place. Everything else will come into focus. We can let go of the fear of man, and it won't hold the same weight as it does before. And I wanted to show you guys a couple pictures, just to kind of bring this comparison home a little bit more. And, if you guys see a volcano, right? Maybe if you're watching TV and you see this thing on the Discovery Channel, or if you've, ever had a chance to see one up close and personal, when you see something like this, how amazing it is, and what a testament to how God created nature that something like this would be possible, and you realize the power behind it, right? It kind of blows you away when you see this. And then you look at something like a campfire, right, in comparison. The campfire, it just doesn't hold a candle, right? It just doesn't measure up to that volcano. You know, if we look at something that maybe if you guys have experienced, if you guys are fans of Disney, and you guys have gone to California Adventure, and you've seen World of Color, you know, you see this amazing show. It's one of those things that, you know, maybe at one time or another, hopefully you guys get to experience. And it really is if you go for the first time, you've never seen it before, it's pretty amazing, right? You see all this water shooting up into the sky choreographed. You see these lights, all this high-tech equipment, you know, images being projected over water, music. You even have fire that's coming out of the lakes, out of the little pond. You know, it just kind of blows your senses away that you see all that's happening here. And you see that, and you're like, man, that is amazing. That is something that is to be experienced. Then if you go to your backyard and you see the sprinklers, you know, it's like, you know, it's nothing, right? It's nothing. It pales in comparison to experiencing World of Color. And I give you guys those comparisons just to put it into focus that when we fear God, it is so much more of a greater thing than fearing man. And I'm not going to say the fear of man won't still be there, because it still will be a struggle. And this is a process, guys. It's a process to fear God and to get ourselves away from these areas that we fear man. It's not something we just, you know, turn a 180 one day and we're like, you know, I'm done with that. But once we're aware of it, we can work towards it. We can work towards it, church. I show you these things because once you fear the God of this universe and you submit and obey him, then anything this world can throw at you and anything that's going to come against you in this world is just not going to measure up. And I hope through that, guys, that we're able to let go of the fear of man and let go of the power that we either let them have in our lives or the power that we give them day in and day out. All right, let's close in prayer. Father, we, I don't want to make this seem like it's such an easy process, Lord, because I know very much it's not. You know, letting go, sometimes for many of us, it's one of the biggest struggles that we have in our lives, Father. I know for me, I can look at my life, and if I'm totally honest with you, Father, man, I struggle with letting go of the fear of man. So many times, you know, what they think or what they say holds such an importance in my life, Father. The things that they can provide for me, the approval, the company that they can provide, I place that on the throne of my life, Father. And many times I put that on equal footing, or maybe sometimes even above you, Lord. But I ask, Father, in my life and the life of the church that's here this morning, that we could fear you in the proper way, Father, that we would take those false idols, that we would take those false fears, and we would take them off the throne, Father, and replace it with you. That when we fear you, Father, everything comes into focus, our choices, our obedience to you, our self-esteem, the way we live our lives. It comes into clear focus, Father, because that's the way you intended it. The fear of the Lord is the beginning of wisdom. Father, I pray that we can meditate on it, that would be a part of our lives, and we can work towards that day in and day out, and trust, Father, in how much you love us. We pray this in your holy name, Father. Amen.